The great knowledge tower of Velis stood quietly beneath. The twin suns where the light touched the crystal walls and spread golden lines across the floors. While inside the vast halls of archives, a young scholar named Ron moved slowly between towering shelves filled with glowing tablets and whispering data strands. He had been a student of galactic history for over 10 years, and now worked under the guidance of Master Aelian, one of the few remaining first-generation members of the Galactic Union. Ron was not known for breaking rules, but curiosity had always pulled him into places others refused to look, and today was no different. He sat in a silent room near the core archive, scrolling through records of ancient treaties when he came across a sealed file titled, simply with bold letters, "Deathworlders do not engage." No author, no timestamp. Just that strange title, and a high-level clearance lock, and something about that file made his thoughts turn cold, as if it carried weight. Beyond what the word suggested, he looked around, then tapped the request key, which brought up the rejection code. "This file is restricted access, limited to High Council and Defense Corps. Only reason classified." Rain leaned back, trying to understand why a document was hidden from even senior scholars. It didn't make sense. And even though Master Aelian had warned him before not to chase dead files, he couldn't let it go. So later that day, when Aelian was away in council, Ran returned to the Tunta core archive alone. He activated the override access link using his temporary archive code he had received for a project on ancient military formations, and he fed it through a loop of non-alert layers, which took him deeper into the storage grid. Until finally the seal broke and the file opened. There were no videos, no long reports, only one page, a single sentence written in a human dialect, but translated clearly into every major galactic language. "They didn't conquer, they warned us." That was all, nothing more, no explanation, no battle record, no detail. And yet that line felt louder than anything he had read before. He sat still, staring at it until the screen dimmed after an activity. But he quickly reactivated it and began digging deeper, looking into old contact records, looking for anything related to humans, which the files called by their ancient code name. Origin-Species-101. He discovered another layer buried under false labels, where he found a broken report from a scout fleet that visited Earth centuries ago. The report spoke of ocean storm systems, forests filled with predators, and constant seismic activity. It also noted that the gravity was higher than galactic norm, and the atmosphere was filled with particulate hazards, yet life thrived there, and at the top of that chain were the humans. What followed in that report felt more like legend than fact. One note said they survived temperatures that would boil other species. They healed rapidly from injuries that would cripple most, and their endurance was beyond standard limits. They adapted to nearly any condition and could function under stress far longer than predicted in simulated tests. The report claimed that a human soldier lasted 40 hours in a zero-sleep combat simulation without medical boosts. What disturbed Ron the most was not their strength, it was their restraint. The log showed that after the scout team made contact, the humans sent a message welcoming open communication, trade, and peace. But when a military faction tried to pressure the humans by staging a soft blockade around their system, all signals were lost for 24 hours. Then, without any counterattack, the blockade ships were suddenly found floating dead in space systems, offline crews unconscious but alive, and no damage to the ships. The humans had not fired a single shot, yet the message was clear. The report ended with one sentence quoted from a human transmission: "You are not our enemy, don't become one." Aren stepped away from the terminal, his heart pounding. He thought about how little the Union really knew about humans. Despite their long-standing membership, they never joined galactic politics, never offered military support, and never requested aid. They lived quietly on their planet, and the few times they sent envoys, it was always with strict boundaries. No weapons, no surveillance, no interference. He went to the viewing deck of the tower and looked up at the stars, wondering which light was Earth and what else had happened that no one spoke of. The more He thought the more he realized that fear was hidden in the silence around human history. It was not just secrecy, it was protection not of Earth, but of the galaxy from Earth. The next morning, Ron confronted his mentor in the garden. Elian was old, his face carved by time, and his eyes distant but clear. When Ron asked why the records on humans were sealed, Elian looked at him for a long time, then said, "Some answers are not meant to comfort you, and some truths don't give peace." Ron said, "I only want to know why the galaxy has a no-war policy with humans." "No other species has such a rule, not even those with fleets 10 times the size of Earth's." Elian finally replied, "They never asked for that policy. It was written by us, not them. We did it after we understood what would happen if we didn't." "But what did we understand?" asked Ron. "What did they do?" Elian closed his eyes and said, "They didn't conquer, they warned us." Then he turned and walked away. Ron stood alone in the garden, his thoughts heavy with questions. He had uncovered pieces, but not the whole truth. He knew now that the answer lay deeper in the forbiddens, archives buried under years of silence and fear, and he would not stop until he found. I returned to the archive chamber later that day and began preparing to break into the deeper levels of restricted history, because something inside him needed to know not just what happened, but why it changed the galaxy forever, and why even now, centuries later, the galaxy still whispered the name Deathworlders with a kind of respect that sounded too close to fear and deep in the silence of the archive. The last line of that first file echoed again in his mind. They didn't conquer, they warned us. It was time to understand exactly what that warning meant. Archive halls were colder than usual as Ron stepped into the deeper zone, where data threads hummed faintly around him like echoes of long-forgotten voices. He moved past old history records, war treaties, star charts, species classifications, and navigational logs, all neatly arranged and glowing in soft lights. But his attention was fixed on the dark corner, sealed behind layers of code, where the oldest contact logs were hidden, not corrupted, not lost, just hidden. He knew what he was doing might result in exile or worse, but the unanswered question was now rooted deep inside his mind, and it was no longer just curiosity. It was something greater. He felt the weight of ignorance pressing on the shoulders of every being who blindly accepted the peace without knowing what blood or reason it had cost. He keyed in a path, bypassing alarms, rerouting archive signals, and after several failed attempts, he accessed the preliminary contact files, labeled under an old code Civ 101, and tagged with the symbol used only during high-threat diplomatic meetings. The seal cracked open with a soundless ripple, and thousands of entries came into view, fragmented, incomplete, but still enough to reveal the beginning. The first report was from a planetary survey team assigned to observe Sector Delta 5, where Earth was located. The data described an ecosystem overflowing with extremes: sudden climate shifts, violent tectonic activity, predatory megafauna, and atmospheric variables outside ideal life parameters. And yet the life forms not only survived, but thrived, and at the top of it all was a species that walked upright, crafted tools, built cities, split atoms, and reached the stars using materials far below galactic standards. Were the humans? The files detailed the moment when the galactic exploration vessel Callan 4 made its first peaceful landing in orbit around Earth. Communication attempts were sent, and surprisingly answered. The human response was not hostile nor afraid. It was curious, polite, cautious, and direct. They introduced themselves, offered assistance, and even invited a small diplomatic exchange to take place on a neutral station between the systems. What fascinated the Council at that time was not just the intelligence of humans, but the way they had developed. Despite such a deadly world, the report said that most scholars at the time believed intelligent life could not evolve under constant threat, but Earth proved that hardship did not kill intelligence. It sharpened it, forged it into something unbreakable. The second file was a log from that first diplomatic meeting, which took place on the orbital station, Iron 1, orbiting a moon near the edge of human territory. The report from the observer described the arrival of the human delegation as calm, disciplined, and unarmed. despite being aware of possible threats from unknown alien civilizations. They wore no armor, no shields, just simple clothing embedded with basic communication tools. They smiled, offered greetings, and spoke in a calm tone, but behind their voices there was something else, not aggression, not fear, but a depth. A stillness like water that hid unimaginable pressure beneath the surface. The negotiations began. Well, trade routes, knowledge sharing, and cultural exchanges were proposed, and seemingly accepted. The humans shared their medical techniques, survival tactics, and even environmental restoration technologies, which shocked many species who still struggled with planetary balance. Then came the incident. Small military testing fleet from a rival species decided to observe the human response to pressure. Without council approval, they sent a stealth blockade around Earth, aiming to test planetary defense systems without direct conflict. Their plan was to trigger a low-scale reaction, analyze response time, and retreat before being noticed. But what happened was not recorded. Any standard log. The testing fleet lost all communication within hours. No data, no transmissions, not even distress signals. The council scrambled for answers, fearing retaliation. But before any action could be taken, a single unmanned vessel arrived from human space, carrying a short message: "You are seen, you are spared, let it remain." So the testing fleet was later found drifting beyond the Oort cloud, all systems offline, crews alive but unconscious, and all memories of the blockade effort wiped clean. No weapon marks, no biological damage, no threats issued, no demands made, and no explanation given. That single event caused massive unrest in the council chambers. Debates stretched for weeks. Some demanded further investigation, others feared what more pressure might provoke, but all agreed on one conclusion: the humans had the means to retaliate, yet they chose not to, and that choice was not weakness, it was a message: do not push further. Read each line with a growing sense of awe and fear. The humans had demonstrated capabilities beyond prediction, but had done so without blood, without violence. They showed dominance not through destruction, but through precision, control, and patience. He moved to the next section, a report written by a cultural liaison who spent 3 months on Earth during early exchange programs. She described humans as emotional, adaptive, humorous, and remarkably empathetic. They formed bonds, quickly valued trust, and respected boundaries once they were set. But she also noted a strange paradox. When threatened, they became calm. When pushed, they became cold. And when someone they loved was hurt, they turned into forces of nature. She recounted a moment when a natural disaster struck a colony ship carrying mixed species among them. Humans were the first to react, pulling strangers from wreckage, creating safe zones. With their bare hands, carrying injured aliens for miles without rest. They did it without command, without orders, simply because they could not stand to see suffering. That same strength that made them dangerous also made them deeply noble. Ron could hardly believe what he read. He always thought fear kept the Pact alive, but now he began to understand it was more than that. It was respect mixed with deep uncertainty. The humans never asked to be feared. They simply made fear unnecessary, because their actions always made a statement: we are strong, but we choose peace unless forced otherwise. He leaned back from the console and stared at the blank screen for a long moment, feeling the scale of what he had just read. This wasn't just history. This was foundation. This was why the Union had sealed the past, not because of shame, not because of weakness, but because they feared what would happen if even one aggressive faction forgot what the humans were truly capable of. And the line from the first file returned again, echoing louder than before. They didn't conquer, they warned us. It wasn't a riddle, it wasn't a threat, it was truth spoken without pride or cruelty, a warning not out of arrogance, but out of clarity, the kind of clarity that only comes from species who mastered not just survival, but control over their own power. Ron saved the files into his private memory core, then stood and left the archive. His thoughts a storm of realization. His question had not just been answered. It had opened a new path ahead. He now understood that the humans had once given the galaxy a chance to choose, and the galaxy chose peace. What would happen if someone ever made the wrong choice again? And as he stepped into the light of Velis, he knew this was only the beginning. The stars above Velis sparkled gently as night settled across the learning towers and quiet gardens. Yet Ron could not rest. His mind burned with questions and pieces of truth that refused to settle. The things he had read in the archives were not just stories, they were fragments of something deeper, something buried not by time, but by choice. Each report hinted at a force too great to provoke, a presence too dangerous to test. And still there were no records of open war, no stories of human fleets conquering galaxies, no images of scorched worlds left behind in their name, only whispers of vanished ships, broken fleets, and one repeated message left behind every time we see, we warn, we do not return. Ron knew this kind of power was not built in rage. It was built in silence, sharpened in chaos, and wrapped in discipline. He wanted to understand more, not just what humans had done, but what they could still do if ever challenged again. And as he walked through the empty corridors of the university, he remembered a term used in one of the older scrolls. The words were simple but chilling. Operation Silence. The file was buried in a layer of the archive that required both bypass and manual key entry. It was not just protected by firewalls, but hidden behind what scholars called living code, ancient defense logic, designed to confuse any unworthy reader. Rand spent hours weaving his way through security traps and misdirects until finally a file opened. Operation Silence was never approved by the Galactic Council. It was a secret mission initiated by a group of military strategists and supported by several powerful factions who feared the growing myth of human restraint. They believed the only way to ensure safety was to fully understand what humans were hiding behind their calm expressions and polite words. Operation aimed to test the true limits of Earth's defensive abilities without provoking a full war. 10 stealth ships were sent to disrupt Earth's satellite grid and jam planetary sensors. They approached under the cover of solar radiation, posing as research vessels, but each was armed with disruption tech powerful enough to simulate a high-level attack. The idea was to see how quickly humans would respond and how far they would go in retaliation. The fleet reported success in Phase 1. All satellites across the planet flickered out of alignment. Ground control lost signal, and panic began to rise. But then the unexpected happened. Every ship in the stealth fleet lost all contact within minutes. No data came back, no video feeds, no emergency transmissions. Just silence, cold, sudden, and absolute. 48 hours later, a single encrypted data packet appeared on a deep space relay station. It contained only coordinates and the same message repeated in over 50 galactic languages. Return what is ours, leave what is yours. The message included no threats, no demands, but it was clear, direct, and left no room for misunderstanding. Council investigators arrived at the given coordinates and found the stealth fleet drifting in orbit around a small moon, each ship powered down, untouched from the outside. Not a single scorch mark or crack, yet inside every system was wiped. Navigation disabled, life support held only at minimum, and all crew were in forced stasis with no memory of the past. 72 hours. Medical scans showed no injury, no mental trauma, yet each crew member woke up with one lingering sensation. Something had been in the ship, something had moved through the walls and air, without opening a door, without making a sound. Ron stared at the report, trying to imagine the level of control it took to dismantle an entire fleet without damage, without death, and without war. This was not brute strength, this was elegance. This was understanding taken to such a level that violence became unnecessary. The humans did not fight back, they simply removed the need to. He moved to the next report from a survivor of the old blockade mission who had defected and later returned under council protection. The man described the silence as the most terrifying moment of his life, not because he was attacked but because he was not. He said he saw nothing, heard nothing, and yet his entire ship shut down around him, like a whisper passed through the hull and took everything with If the report ended with a line scribbled by hand, something ancient and fearful, they walked among us, but we never saw them. They chose not to end us, and that was the worst part. They chose. Iran felt a tightness in his chest as he read the words again and again. This was not military science. This was a philosophy of power built on choice, a species that could burn worlds but chose to guide them, a species that had every reason to dominate but chose to step back. He remembered the rescue mission mentioned in a previous report, where a colony was attacked by pirates and humans responded before any galactic fleet could reach the scene. They used small ships fast and quiet, their weapons barely visible, only used to disable, no fatalities on either side, and every prisoner was turned over alive. When the council asked why they helped, the humans replied because they asked for help once, and we said yes, but the council also noted that no second request was ever answered. When the same species later joined a war effort and tried to drag Earth into their side, the humans declined without explanation. They did not support conquest. They did not join revenge missions. They had one principle: we do not return where peace is broken. It was mercy, but not weakness, and that mercy had become a wall thicker than any shield made from fear and gratitude. And something else, something that could not be measured in charts or strategy, stood in the observation ring, watching the galactic map shift slowly above him. Thousands of lights, representing millions of worlds, and in one corner, a faint blue dot labeled Earth alone, unguarded, yet untouched, and he understood now that the No War Pact was not a gift. It was not protection granted by the Council. It was a line drawn by Earth itself, one that said, come in peace or not at all. He turned away from the stars and walked back to his chamber with the quiet realization that some species build power to rule, others to protect. But humanity had done something different. They had become a mirror to the galaxy, showing each civilization not who humans were, but what they themselves might become if they ever forgot restraint. And somewhere in his mind that same sentence played again, no longer as a mystery, but as truth spoken by a force that needed no introduction and no approval. They didn't conquer, they warned us. The High Council chambers were never built for silence. They were made for debate, for fire, for the clash of opinions from hundreds of worlds. Yet that day long ago, when the topic of the Deathworlders rose for final judgment, the silence weighed more than any voice. It was not just fear that filled the air, but the heavy pressure of realization that something old, something powerful had been watching from the shadows, not hidden but ignored by choice. The council members had read the same reports Ron had uncovered. Some of them had seen more reports, never released to the public, classified accounts where humans responded to threats with precision, no retaliation, no chaos, just results. Fleets silenced, weapons turned into sand, command centers disabled in moments, as if the galaxy's rules of time and space did not apply to them. Many council members remembered the blockade incident. Some had been part of the decision to allow it. They called it a probe, an assessment, never expecting the humans to notice or care. But when the entire operation disappeared, without even a single transmission returned, and then reappeared intact, untouched and emptied of resistance, the message had already been delivered, without words, without war, only a silent promise: you may try again, but it will not end the same. A tall figure named Arden stood before the council that day. He was not known for fear or weakness. He was once a general, a leader of the Tarset campaigns, but today his hands trembled as he held the final report from Operation Silence and looked at the others and said, we have spent lifetimes building fleets, training armies, forging alliances to keep peace among ourselves. We always thought power meant numbers, firepower, strategy. But we have seen something different now, something that rewrites everything. He turned toward the galactic map in the center of the hall, where Earth glowed quietly in a distant corner, and he said, they have no empire, they claim no worlds, they build no thrones, yet when they speak, we listen, not because we fear death, but because we understand it would come without anger, without warning, without glory. The chamber filled with quiet murmurs. Diplomats and delegates spoke in whispers. many still struggling to accept that one small world could carry such weight. The debate stretched for hours and called it surrender. Others called it wisdom, but one voice cut through them all, not loud, not forceful, only calm. It belonged to a representative from a neutral species, the Kyrians, a race of record keepers, known for staying out of conflict. Their delegate spoke slowly and said, "We have reviewed the interactions with humans in every instance. Their first choice was dialogue in every conflict. Their first act was restraint in every betrayal. Their first response was understanding, but what followed was always shaped by what we chose to give them." He paused and then said, "Let us be honest with ourselves. We are not signing a treaty to protect them. We are writing a law to protect ourselves from what happens if we ever forget who we are dealing with." That sentence settled the room into stillness. No one argued, no one could. And so the draft was brought forward, a formal declaration that Earth and its people, known across the stars as Deathworlders, would be recognized as non-combatant sovereign space. Any hostile action against them would be considered a threat to galactic stability, and any provocation would be answered not by the Council, but by Earth itself, without interference or judgment. Humans responded to the offer with something unexpected. They did not celebrate. They did not express dominance. They simply agreed. With one small condition, their message was clear and brief. "You may visit, you may learn, you may walk beside us, but if you come with weapons, understand that you have already made your choice." It was not a warning, it was an agreement, an understanding between a species that had climbed from fire and ash into the stars, and a galaxy that finally recognized what kind of fire it had nearly provoked. Pact was signed that day with no parade, no ceremony, just a quiet nod from all major factions, and a shared decision to place the name of Earth in a separate list, one not marked by power or status, but by something more ancient. Respectren finished reading the final details of that event with a strange feeling growing inside him, not fear, not awe, but something deeper, something closer to understanding. For the first time he saw the humans, not just as legends or mysteries, but as beings, shaped by survival and clarity, not born to conquer, but born to never be conquered again. He closed the final file and stood in the archive chamber, surrounded by the voices of the past, and thought about what the galaxy might look like if humans had chosen differently. What if they had not warned? What if they had not spared? What if they had responded with fire instead of silence? He stepped outside into the soft light of Veles, the sky stretching above like a sea of unknown paths. And for a moment, he imagined ships crossing the stars, not with weapons, but with questions, not with claims, but with choices. The humans had not demanded anything from the galaxy, yet the galaxy had rewritten its laws to make sure it never made the wrong move again. That kind of power could not be measured by how many ships one had, or how many planets flew under its flag. It was something earned by what one could do and what one chose not to do. As Ron walked through the quiet gardens of the university, he saw a group of young scholars gathered around a model of the galactic map. One of them pointed to Earth and asked the same question he once asked: "Why is this planet marked as off-limits? What makes them so special?" And Ron, without hesitation, said, "Because they asked for nothing and gave us everything we needed: a mirror to our limits and a reason to never test theirs." And in his heart he knew the next part of his journey had just begun. Ron stood quietly in the docking bay of the neutral envoy ship assigned to him. The journey he had been preparing for since the first sealed file would now take him to Earth itself, the world called the Origin, the Death World, the anomaly of nature, where life had fought through ice, fire, flood, and endless struggle to give birth to a species that had reshaped the very meaning of strength, not through domination, but through unimaginable control. He watched as the stars blurred into long streaks of light the moment they entered the faster-than-light corridor. Silence filled the ship, broken only by the hum of the engines. Yet inside Ron's mind, there was no silence, only questions, old ones that still echoed. What kind of species lives with such power and does not use it to rule? What keeps them from becoming the very fear others have projected onto them? He had read files spoken to old diplomats reviewed videos hidden in layers of classified knowledge, but he had never seen the planet for himself. When the ship slowed and real space returned, Earth came into view, floating like a blue gem wrapped in clouds and ocean. Its shape was familiar from recordings, but nothing prepared Ron for the feeling he felt as he saw it. Not just the sight of the planet, but the presence that seemed to radiate from it, as if the world itself remembered everything it had endured and carried the weight of every step humanity had taken. He disembarked at a floating diplomatic hub built for interspecies visits. The place was quiet and small, and unlike the grand halls of the Galactic Union, there was no ceremony, no guards, no inspection. He was greeted not by officials but by a soft-voiced human dressed in simple clothing, who offered a handshake and said, "Welcome to Earth, Traveleron." Was taken to a viewing dome set high above a forest where he could observe human cities in the distance. They were not made of metal or crystal like Velis. Instead, they seemed to grow from the land with a strange blend of nature and technology. Buildings surrounded by trees, machines working beside animals, people walking without armor, without visible defense. And yet not a single part of it looked weak. Later he was taken to a gathering hall, where elder citizens shared stories not of war, but of exploration, art, and kindness. He listened to one man named Daniel who had served as an explorer during Earth's expansion into neutral space. Daniel spoke of lost colonies found again, not with weapons, but with aid missions sent without waiting for permission, not because it was duty, but because it was right. Ron asked him why Earth never took advantage of its power, why they never enforced galactic rules or shaped politics the way stronger civilizations once did. Daniel looked at him with eyes that had seen generations and simply said, "Because we remember what it took to survive, and we remember what it means to fall. We rose from a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we learned that winning does not always mean destroying. Sometimes it means letting others make their choice and living with the consequences." As the days passed, Ron walked through museums, schools, markets, and homes. He saw children learning next to plants and animals, technology blended with culture and history preserved, not to boast, but to remind. He visited old monuments, dedicated not to generals but to scientists, engineers, healers, and peacekeepers. He saw memories carved in stone of past failures, of near extinction, events of civil wars and disaster, and each one carried a message. Never again, not because we are afraid, but because we are aware. In his final day on Earth, Ron stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast ocean, where the wind carried the scent of salt and life, and in that moment he finally understood the truth that no document could explain. The galaxy fears Earth, not because it is violent, but because it isn't. Because every time humans are challenged, they answer with patience, until patience becomes warning. And even then they hesitate, hoping the other side sees the edge before they fall over. I thought of the many species who had once tried to test that edge, who had tried to measure what could not be measured, who had sent fleets, who had sent threats, and who were all still alive only because the humans let them be. He remembered the no-war pact not as a line of defense, but as a line of trust. It was not forced by Earth but accepted by the galaxy, because somewhere deep inside every council member, every admiral, every strategist understood the cost of breaking that trust was not just loss, it was disappearance. A kind of silence that carried no smoke, no fire, no explosion, only absence. When Ron returned to Velis, he brought no samples, no stolen data, no weapons, only words. He entered the same archive where his journey began and opened a new entry into the historical record. Deathworlders, also known as humans, are not a threat by design, but by potential. They evolved on a world that defied life, yet they built life upon it. They do not rule, they walk beside, and those who walk beside them are safe. Those who walk against them vanish, not in violence, but in warning. Their strength lies not in destruction, but in discipline. Their history is not perfect, but their restraint is unmatched. The Galactic No-War Pact is not a shield for Earth. It is a mirror for us all, a reminder of the cost of arrogance and the value of mercy. And as Ron sealed the file, he knew the truth was finally complete. Not a myth, not a secret, but a story every species needed to remember. Because somewhere in the galaxy, someone might forget again, but Earth would not. Earth would remember, and Earth would wait the end.